We live in the era of the new. The next patch, the next reboot, the next blockbuster. But every giant leap we take today is landing in the footprints of the legends who walked before us. Whether it's the sweeping crystals of Final Fantasy defining what a story could feel like, or Frank Miller's The Dark Knight rewriting the DNA of the modern hero. We aren't just consuming media, we're inheriting a legacy. I'm the Batman Drew, and this is the For Those Who Come After podcast, a celebration of the foundations that built our world. Let's look back at all the content that made us. All right, everybody, welcome to the first episode of the For Those Who Come After podcast. So, if you don't know the quote, For Those Who Come After, then obviously you haven't played the newest and recent game of the year, Expedition 33. The gist of this podcast is really to celebrate the history and the legacy of franchises in video games, movies, comic books, TV shows, really all forms of media, and to celebrate what came before and what paved the way for, honestly, the content we consume every day now in our lives, right, as fans. And so in this first episode, I figured we would kick it off with a franchise that's near and dear to my heart, near and dear to our guest heart, and kind of dive right on into the world of Final Fantasy. But first, it's not just me in this podcast. I have a special guest with us who will probably become a very reoccurring guest with us. It is the Dad Man. Dad Man, tell us where people can find you on social media and the platforms you're on.
Thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me on. Yeah, my name is the Dad Man. You can find me on YouTube as well as very lightly on TikTok. Still trying to figure out the whole TikTok thing, but primarily you can find most of my content on YouTube. Right now, it's a lot of just Magic the Gathering stuff, but I am working on getting some more game reviews on the channel, and I'm working on a series for 2026 called the Retro Rewind. So that is what I'm really looking forward to for next year.
That's going to be awesome. And you know, we met because of Magic the Gathering, but specifically our shared love of Final Fantasy.
Right.
And you know, I figured when you're looking at things like, you know, legacy and you know, IPs that kind of started it all. As I did this documentary I've been working on my YouTube channel, and I started digging into the history of Final Fantasy, I learned so much about the first Final Fantasy game that I had no idea about. And so when I wanted to be able to do this podcast specifically, and as of today, there's no trademark on For Those Who Come After. So we reserve the right to change the name once
Yeah.
Expedition 33 puts a trademark down on that title. But I figured Final Fantasy would be a great place to start. So before we jump into the game and the storyline, just a quick, brief history on Final Fantasy that came out originally for the NES. If you don't know the story of Final Fantasy One, it is maybe the most impressive and important Hail Mary pass in all of gaming history. It's a tale of a struggling company with, I believe they were SquareSoft at the time. I think that's what they
I think it was
were.
just. I think it was just. I think it was just Square.
The Square,
Yeah.
either way, right? So you know, Square was you know on the ropes. They were quickly going bankrupt because of a couple of failed projects prior to Final Fantasy, and this was honestly a last ditch effort. So in 1987, the developers, Square, if I read my own notes here, now Square Enix,
Yes.
was in dire financial straits. In their previous titles, Deep Dungeon and The King's Knight, which I haven't heard of either one of those, hadn't
Neither have I.
performed very well at all. And at this point, the director, who was very disillusioned with his career, had felt like if his next project wasn't successful, he was just going to quit the industry and just give it all up. And what's funny about that is I think we've all kind of been there, right? So, Adrian, Dadman here, has had some success in the past with some YouTube channel and building some content. This is kind of my first go, and I will tell you, this shit's hard. So I get it. Like when you're trying to build something up, and you have failure after failure, like it can get disheartening pretty quick. And so At this point, he had decided that this was it, and the next game he put out, if it was going to be a bust, he was just done. He was done with his career. He was going to move on. And so with Square facing, the bankruptcy of their company, and he facing the end of his career, they set out to develop what is now known as Final Fantasy. The name itself is actually pretty interesting. The developers wanted to be able to have what they called the FF role because they felt like a an abbreviation of the game FF would really sound cool and be easier for some of the Japanese players to, or gamers to be able to say, and it would kind of roll off the tongue a little bit better. So they wanted to go with fighting fantasy, but apparently there was a British tabletop game that had the same name, and they already had it trademarked. So they ended up going, since this was their final Hail Mary, their final project, they replaced fighting with final, and we have what is maybe the most recognizable video game title of all time with Final Fantasy. Aside from some of your platformers like Mario or Sonic, people know Final Fantasy. They know the name, they know the history, and the legacy that comes with those games. And so a couple of really quick fun facts before we dive into the game. This one I thought was pretty interesting. The iconic prelude, the music for Final Fantasy was composed in just about 5 minutes because they needed one more track at the very last second, and I'm gonna butcher his name. It's Nobio.
No, no,
Um,
Nobuo
yeah,
Uematsu.
yeah, I'm terrible with names, and you're talking about Japanese names. I'm not even gonna even try. But in my opinion, up there as composers with the likes of John Williams and Hans Zimmer, like he is
Oh yeah.
made some of the most iconic music in video game history. Yeah, he the iconic prelude to Final Fantasy, he dug it in right at the last minute and right before the deadline to be able to fit that in, which I thought was pretty interesting. And then the original NES version had a lot of bugs in it, which I mean most games do, obviously, but they were probably even more so on a rush to get this out. So
Yeah.
it was kind of funny that several stats in the games didn't actually work. So, for example, the intelligence that was supposed to make spells stronger had a programming error, and it did absolutely nothing for the game. And then they also had certain weapons that were meant to be stronger against like the undead or against dragons that actually provided zero bonus damage to for your combat style. And so it's funny how like even to this day like games continue to come out with bugs and issues, and that was no exception for Final Fantasy. So and then lastly, I because I have a whole bunch of different little side notes here, but I thought this one was pretty interesting. In the original Japanese version, there was a tombstone in one of the towns that says "Here lies Link," and it's a nice little reference to the Legend of Zelda, which apparently was a friendly jab at Nintendo's Legend of Zelda. And in English, the NES release it was changed to "May Edric rest in peace." I went to this town when I played this game for the first time on the Pixels Remastered, and it
Mhm.
clearly did not have "Here Lies Link," but I thought that was a pretty fun little Easter egg.
That's petty.
But
That's so
listen,
petty.
it really is. But listen, all of it resulted in Square initially, you know, planning to have about 200,000 copies of this game, and it completely blew up for them. Ended up being one of their most massive hits, obviously, of their company's career at that point, and it saved them from bankruptcy and ended up launching a franchise that has lasted nearly 40 years now. And the
Mhm.
amount of money that they've made off of this franchise, I mean, it is to them what Mario is to Nintendo and what Sonic is to Sega. And so I think and Square has developed a ton of other RPG games, obviously throughout the years, but it started with the success of Final Fantasy, and we'll kind of dig into its um, rich history that it's kind of developed here in just a moment. But we had just talked about this prior to recording this, Dad man, and you haven't had a chance to play it, but obviously you know the history there, you know the storyline.
Yeah. Yeah.
um I was like, the game came out in what, 1987, so
Yeah. 87.
that was the year I was born, so obviously I hadn't played it, ever. And when it came out for Pixels Remastered, I decided to visit it on my Nintendo Switch. And I gotta tell you, although I have faults with the game, it's a pretty good game. Storyline wise and things like that, I can see why at the time it was so revolutionary. So what are your opening thoughts about Final Fantasy 1? Everything we kind of covered with its history and everything, like what do you feel about the franchise, and kind of your first initial thoughts about it?
So it's funny because like when I started playing Final Fantasy, at the in the late 90s, because I played my first Final Fantasy was 8, and I was like probably like 99, so I was about 8 years old. But like you don't really know like the history of it at that age. Like you don't really start like researching stuff until you get to the age where it piques your curiosity, right? So I didn't really learn anything about anything prior to Final Fantasy 7 till I was like in high school. And it's interesting because like out of Square and Sakaguchi's like desperation to have success, they kind of hit a home run, for all intents and purposes, right? And it's like it's funny because like failure is such like a loaded concept, right? Like nobody wants to fail. Like it's like it's one of the most human like things to fail, but like nobody wants to do it. But
Yeah,
I grew up my entire life playing baseball, and baseball literally is a sport about failure. Like you fail 70% of the time, and if you do, you're considered good, right? So
yeah.
I've kind of
There are
accepted
Hall of
failure.
Famers batting
Yeah,
300 in the Hall of Fame. Yeah,
exactly. So it's like I've accepted failure as like not so much a negative thing, just like failure is the best motivator to keep at it. So, in the wake of their failures, like they came up with this idea to kind of throw like a Hail Mary and it stuck. And, obviously I thank them for that because now fast forward to 2025 and it's, like you said, one of the most successful franchises over the last 30 plus years, and spin offs and merchandise and crossovers with Magic. Like there's so many different things that, Final Fantasy has brought to the world. But, the, like the bones of the first one are sprinkled throughout the entire anthology series, and I appreciate that because it's like you're respecting the history to where it's brought you to today. And I guess you could say like some of the newer games like 15 and 16 and remake, they're a little bit of a departure from like that old school like turn-based style, but everything has to evolve, right, to not only appeal to the older generation but the newer generation. And at the end of the day, you can't please both people, right? Like you can't please like the purists who want to maintain that old style turn based, and then you also can't please the people who are like, yeah, let's go for the whole like action combat system. So it's going to be interesting to see like what happens with like Final Fantasy 17 now that we've had games like Clair Obscur Expedition 33 like completely go back and nail the turn-based style. So it's going to be interesting, but I mean you have to like pay respect to, I guess, I don't want to say the granddaddy of them all, because Dragon Warrior, which is now Dragon Quest, like Dragon Warrior really figured it out back in the early 80s. Like that was the thing. It was Dragon Warrior. And piggybacking off of success and having like success adjacent to something that was already successful is really good. But what I think is crazy is like how successful like Dragon Warrior and Dragon Quest was up until a point, and then Final Fantasy just like completely took it
yeah,
over to where now like they're both the same like Square Enix is one company now. So it will be interesting to see like when all is said and done, like the rise of Square and the fall of Enix to now being the same platform or like the same company. would be super interesting to see like how that happened. But yeah, I mean, kudos to the original development team for like not giving up and really being passionate about what they were developing. I think we lose that a lot nowadays. Like people just make things to print money as opposed to because they're passionate about it, and it definitely shows. But I think the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to see it come back full circle, and you're going to start seeing projects being developed with passion and care, and that's what really makes for good games, in my opinion.
See, I totally agree, and you just said something right there at the end that I feel is super important with the Final Fantasy franchise. It's the passion behind the projects that they have, right? Like obviously they wanted to save their company. It was, as we already spoke about, this is a Hail Mary for them to be able to save their finances. Um, but I think that you don't have something as innovative as Final Fantasy without there being passion behind it, right? So hearken to Stan Lee saying, "I'm going to make the Fantastic Four. If you're going to fire me, this is my last comic book I'm going to make. I'm going to make what I want to make." Fast
Hmm.
forward, 30 plus years, you have Expedition 33 and the passion and love behind that game and the development of that game saying, "No, this is what we want to make." And you hope people love it, you hope people respond to it. But when you create out of passion, at the very end of the day, even if it's not successful, you can look at what you did and be proud of it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what these things have in common. I think they looked at it and said, "Hey, we're glad it was successful, but we're proud of what we did. Let's build on it." And Final Fantasy, like the success the franchise had for 30 plus years, um honestly is very similar in my opinion to what we get with modern day MCU, for example, right? Because you had I mean, and I'm sure Iron Man will eventually fall on this list of things to be able to review, but you started with the first Iron Man movie, then you built on it with the Hulk, then you built on it with Captain America, Thor, the Avengers movies, and everything just continued to keep escalating and escalating and escalating, and you continue to have hit after hit after hit, because you realized that you had something special, and you weren't afraid to go ahead and pour your all into it. What was unique about Final Fantasy though is that the MCU all connects together and it has this connective tissue and it all weaves in together. Final Fantasy didn't, and to me that's remarkable to be able to have the success you had. Yeah, some games were more well received than others, sure, but you had such success with the franchise that had all different interesting unique storylines in them for every iteration of the game. And to me, I just think that's unbelievable. When you're talking about how innovative the game was, however, at the time there are a couple of things that really stood out. So first, we're going to talk about the combat style. So turn-based, Expedition 33. Although there were things about it I wish could have been done a little bit differently. At the very end of the day, I loved the combat style of Expedition 33 because yeah, it wasn't just button mashing. Like I'm playing Ghost of Yote right now, and honestly, I'm just running up to people and just hitting X and killing folks as I'm going through. There's
Right.
strategy involved there, right? So when you're talking about turn based, I personally I love the turn based model. But what Final Fantasy did with their combat was they were one of the first people to move away from first person perspective and give you a side profile of the
Right.
entire battlefield. So you had your enemies and you had your heroes, um, and I think that small detail, battle wise, was really cool. Obviously, the combat and being able to see how that worked out. But I honestly believe it's what helped get you so invested in the characters that you were playing with at that time, right? So when you go into Final Fantasy, you can choose from 6 different character types. You can name those characters, things like that. Um, but without being able to see them like actually on screen, I think you lose a little bit of I guess connection and
Hmm.
investment in those characters. And I
Hmm.
think it was a brilliant move with the fighting and the action combat, or the combat, excuse me, the turn-based combat that they had at the time. So when you're looking at the innovative style of fighting for Final Fantasy, you had already kind of hit it on the head, but with talking about turn-based, but do you think like if we hadn't got what we got with that first Final Fantasy, what do you think the landscape of RPGs would look like now? I mean, obviously they would have developed some way somehow, but do you feel like this was an important factor in what came to be now?
Yeah. So, like, if you go back to like the real like OGs, when it comes to like the turn based role playing RPGs like in the community, like you have your Final Fantasies and stuff like that. But like like if you go even further back than that, like you have your Dragon Warriors and you have your Fantasy Star. Like Fantasy Star was the first like one that I played that was more like a dungeon crawler, like first person perspective in
Yeah.
battle, and I hated it. Like I because you go back, right? Because you grow
Yeah.
so like I grew up with Final Fantasy. So like when I think of turn based, I see all my characters on the screen, I see all my enemies on the screen, and they're little chibi or whatever art style fighting each other. But then when you go back and you play like what came before, and it's just like, yeah, I have to keep an open mind and like pay respect to Fantasy Star was on the 32X, the Sega 32X, which was before the Genesis. So you're talking about something basically ancient at this point, right? And um, yeah, I hated it. Like just the like I don't see my attacker on the screen. Like I just see the little creature that I'm attacking, and I was like, what is this? But like you have to, you know, remove yourself from that and be like, well, this is what was considered like successful back in the day. And then whenever there's like an innovation that changes the direction of the entire industry, you have something good on your hands, because I can't think like now like so pre Final Fantasy everything was first person attack
Yeah.
combat, right? And then pre Final Fantasy, it's like that third person, like kind of like 2D, like side scroller attacking pattern on the screen, and like everything was like that up until you got like 3D models on your 32-bit and 64-bit consoles, and then it was still the same thing, but just in a third dimension. So like just the
Yeah.
perspective changed, but like Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, like they were still that same turn-based style, but just now in a 3D plane. It didn't really change like until you got, the action combat system, which was, I mean, Final Fantasy 15 was the first Final Fantasy that departed that I can think of, because 13 was still turn-based, right? Yeah, so
Yeah.
Final Fantasy
Well,
15 was the first.
13 had like that it started its hybrid, right? Because 13 did that it was a little bit action combat, but then you also had the ability to be able to change your
Yeah, like the
like
paradigm
your
shift system and
dynamic.
all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But like still like the core of Final Fantasy 13's combat was still like turn-based, but it was active
Yeah.
turn. So you have to wait for your meter to fill up in order
It
to
did,
do
yeah.
an action. You weren't like actively moving around the field. So like Final Fantasy 15 came out and it completely departed from that turn-based style, and it had been done before but not in a Final Fantasy title. So like when you look back at like the history of RPGs and you look at like, okay, everything is basically copy and paste, and then just like a couple of changes, like copy my homework, but like make it look a little different so you don't
Yeah.
get a zero. And that's what Square did. Like they basically were like, okay, we need to build a game that has a good story, that has a good overworld. But how we're going to differ from Dragon Warrior or Fantasy Star is the combat. And I think you have to look at that and be like, that was the innovation that Square went with, and it was the standard for such a long time until like modern day. Like, and now we're trying to go back to it, which is crazy. Like, yeah, listen, I liked Remake and Rebirth just as much as anybody, but if you were to tell me like I'm going to remake Final Fantasy 7 from start to finish and it's going to be turn-based but with the holy shit graphic capability that we have today, just take my money. Just take my
Yeah.
money, because that's what I want. Like I think
Yeah.
that's what a lot of people want, and that's why I still fall back on. I feel like Final Fantasy X perfected the combat, even though it was like the conditional turn-based system. Like I still think that's the perfect battle system that we've seen up to date. Claire Obscure got really close, but I have a couple nitpicks with it. Final Fantasy X to me is the perfect battle system, and if we get like Final Fantasy 17 is Final Fantasy X's combat, but with today's graphics and today's storytelling and today's like voice actors, dude, like that's what we want. I think that's what we all want.
Well, and to that, like I will tell you, I think it makes for a better, smoother gameplay. So, thinking about Expedition 33 versus thinking about my playthrough with Ghost of Yotei right now, I'm liking Ghost of Yotei. Don't get me wrong, but anytime that there needs to be a cinematic cut between myself and the boss that I'm fighting, it is a very abrupt end to the fight we're at, blackout screen, move to your cutscene, then return back to the fight. Where some of the things that Expedition 33 did really well was when you're in the middle of that fight, when it became your boss's turn. So, like thinking of Rainier, for example, when it would go to him and he had dialogue to deliver, it would wait until his turn, and it was just very seamless, and it never felt like it took you out of the game. It just allowed things to be able to flow naturally, and I agree with you. I think if you have, because I personally, I love Final Fantasy Remake, and I thought Final Fantasy Rebirth, I although had its problems, I thought it was a very good installment, second part to the series. And it's probably too late now for whatever the third installment is to move to a turn base. But if you could give us, you and I both have a shared love for Final Fantasy VIII. If you ever gave us a remake of Final
Oh
Fantasy VIII
God.
with the turn-based model of Expedition
Uh,
33, with some of those key elements of that Final Fantasy X gave us, like I think there are ways that you could really make some of these remakes work very, very well. And then forget the remakes, but to your point, Final Fantasy 17, whenever that's going to come out, and things like
mhm.
that. So yeah, I think the turn based, the side by side view, all of it really led up to more investment in your battles, and it wasn't just, oh, okay, here's another boss I got to fight. It really felt very cinematic in nature, and we'll talk about that here in just 1 second. But first, moving on to what I felt like was the second most important part of it, if it's innovation as a game, and we already hit on this a little bit, but it was the party system. In
Yeah.
many RPGs, you
Yeah.
play as one single hero or preset group. But what Final Fantasy allowed you to do was there were six different types that you could choose from, job types to choose from for your four-member party. So you could either be a warrior, a thief, a monk, a red mage, a white mage, or a black mage. Me, Andrew, chose the warrior, of course. I made my little
Mhm.
brat of a son. I gave him a character, and he was a thief. Um, and so I think the fact that you were able to interchange your characters allowed for a very, awesome replayability of that
Mhm.
game. So I just imagine if I was born 10 years earlier, a 10-year-old Andrew sitting in front of his NES playing Final Fantasy for the first time, making it through the game, beating it, and then knowing I could restart it, change my characters, and have a
Right.
completely different experience. That is has honestly, it is, because video games, especially now with DLCs that get added afterwards and things like that, they heavily rely on the replay availability. Final Fantasy led to this, and I think it was a brilliant, brilliant move on the developers' part to be able to kind of have that interchangeable. So, what do you think? Am I crazy here? Do you think that was a big part of the game?
Yeah, the job system, yeah, I'm all for that. Like, I I have two schools of thought. Like in certain games, it works, right? So like in Final Fantasy VII, which is probably the most popular of all the Final Fantasies, there isn't really a job system because it's all based off of your materia and like how you build your character. So you could build your character like however you want. Like if you want Cloud, who is prototypically like your warrior because he's the sword wielder. If you want him to be your black mage, you could do that, and there is value in that. Like you, because you can essentially, it's more sandboxy. You can play the game how you want to play it. So like I there I I get that, and it works for Final Fantasy VII. Like it works for that, but then Final Fantasy X, I'm gonna sound like a broken record here. Final Fantasy X literally is presented to you as that old school job system. Like Tidus is your fast, quick hitter, but his defense and his magic defense are terrible. So he's like your glass cannon character. Then you have Waka, who's like your range guy, and then you have Lulu, who's clearly your black mage, and you have Yuna, who's your white mage. You have Kamari, who's your blue mage. You have Orin, who's like your sentinel, like he's your tank. You have all these characters, and Riku is like your thief. So you have like the job system underlying there in Final Fantasy X. But the genius thing that they did was they allowed you to, at a certain point in the game on the sphere grid, switch classes.
Yeah.
But it was late enough into the game where you weren't super overpowered in the beginning, and it made
Yeah.
your other characters obsolete. Like you still had to on the fly, like I always go into a Final Fantasy X run with like Waka, Tidus, and Lulu in the early game, and then as soon as I get Riku, like Riku's in my main party. So it's like Waka, Tidus, and Riku, and then I switch out like whoever I need for like strengths and weaknesses, which I thought was amazing. Which why is why I think that that's the best combat system. But even though it's not like the job system spelled out in front of you, it's still there. Like you still have your classes, and I think that's good too because it gives you that structure, and it doesn't force you to play, but it makes it more valuable through your playthrough to kind of play with everyone, so that way you can progress through the game without having to worry about like massive difficulty spikes. And then when you get to the late game, of course, you could just do whatever the hell you want because the sphere grid allows you to do that. So the materia system works with FF7. The job system works with FF10. I do like both of them. I feel like it's kind of needed for like the structure, because there are multiple characters. Like Final Fantasy VI, right? It has an insanely sized roster. Like there's so many characters, playable characters in Final Fantasy VI. And then if you didn't have certain jobs or certain aspects of certain characters, they'd probably get lost in the shuffle. So yeah, I think the job system was genius, because it put a limitation on it, kind of put a little bit of a limitation on you, but it made it worth it because of the way the progression was laid out. And then of course, like if you leveled up your characters and you got to like their ultimate spells and their ultimate abilities, like it just like, yeah, I want to use this guy, or like, I want to use this black mage, or I want to use all these white spells and all these buffs and debuffs, and I want my sword character to hit for quad 9 damage. Like it just made it a lot of customization, but in a linear structure that the payoff was really nice. There's like those classes of games, and then there's like the FF7s, which is like kind of do whatever the hell you want, but the payoff is still there. So yeah, I think the change from that first person combat to that like side scrolling everything on the screen combat, and the addition of the job system, I think was genius. I think those two things, like there's core elements to all Final Fantasies, like the crystals and all that, and like the summons and all like that. But like the turn based combat and the jobs and the job classifications, I think to me are like 1A and 1B, and then
Yeah.
you could build a Final Fantasy game around just those two concepts.
No, I totally agree, and I think for me, I'm really big on feeling like I'm having a unique experience with my gaming, and I think given the different job selects, given the now as an adult gamer, I'll use adult in quotation marks. As an adult gamer, I don't care for games that are like, here you can choose your name and customize with your name. I don't fucking care about that anymore, right? But as a kid, I
Yeah,
was like, oh
yeah,
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 I can be the name of our hero, like absolutely. Um, Another thing that the game did, and I'm gonna swap these two things around from the show notes I sent you, because I think the last two we're gonna hit on are arguably the most important of the five that I have listed. So we're gonna skip ahead to the advanced transportation, the airship. Now the airship is iconic in every Final Fantasy game, right? The
yeah,
fast travel, it's a great way. Like you have reached almost like your midway point of a Final Fantasy game when you're able to get into that airship, right? Um, Playing through the my playthrough of Final Fantasy 1, what drove me absolutely fucking bonkers was having to walk everywhere I went, and then having to when I walked everywhere, then all of a sudden I was able to get a fucking canoe, and then after I got a canoe, I was able to get a boat, and then finally after getting a boat, I was able to get the airship. And I understand the progression, but Final Fantasy games and most RPGs, but most of the ones I've played have been Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy games are notorious for I'm going to walk 4 steps, boss fight, or not boss
Yeah.
fight, but go into battle. Walk four
Yeah.
steps, go into battle. Walk 4 steps, go into battle. So the airship allowed you in finally the pivotal part of the game to be able to say, okay, I can just travel. I can go wherever I want to go. I don't have to continue to grind it out and have all these battles. And when I think of some of the more iconic Final Fantasy titles, thinking of Final Fantasy 10 for example, when you finally get with Sid and you get that airship and you're able to finally travel around and see places and go places that you've wanted to explore for the entire game, what I think it did fantastic is forget the fast travel, forget moving around, because I do think like when you have like fast travel now in games, you can just select a location, hit triangle, and move there. I think this is a progression of what we eventually got with the airship, right? But
Hmm.
what it did for Final Fantasy was at a point where we're I don't want to say exhausted with the gameplay, but at the point where we've kind of like done everything we can, it opened up a new game for us and a new world for us. And I remember again to Final Fantasy X when I got that airship and realized there's so many things that I can go do now. And it just opened up the world, and it made the game feel like here's your 4 walls of the game, and then boom, here's every genuinely open world, go wherever you want to go.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I thought it was super unique and innovative, and the fact that again playing this game I didn't have to fucking go by canoe anymore, I was all for. So with advanced transportation, obviously in newer games now we have different ways to be able to move around and explore open world. But what are your thoughts about the airship specifically through the course of Final Fantasy games?
It's funny because, like, for me, like, I don't mind getting into a battle every 4 steps. Like, it's never really bothered me. I because like, I love the combat, right? So, like,
Yeah,
yes, it gets super repetitive, and it could be the same, like, whatever, like, I'm fighting this freaking scorpion for the 50th time, I'm just gonna kill him anyway with one shot. But I've never really been like, ugh. But then at the same time, like, they add in, like, so Final Fantasy 8 is my favorite Final Fantasy of all time. It's my favorite game of all time. In Final Fantasy 8, after you get the Diablo summon from the mystical lamp from when you go onto your first mission from Sid, at a certain point, Diablo learns the no encounter ability, and then if you just slap it on, you never get encounters. So, like, stuff like those quality of life features are there, but like, it's something you have to work towards, right? So it's
yeah,
like, it's not like today's gaming world is, oh, I'm just gonna buy this microtransaction and then have this, right? Like, those
yeah,
older games, like, it made you work for your stuff, and I really appreciated that. Yeah, like, the shortcut would be the airship, but some games, like, you kind of need to be like, the airship can't take you everywhere, so like, you have to land somewhere and then walk to another area. I think in 7 specifically, like, when you're exploring, I think it's right after you fight Ruby Weapon, like, you have access to, for Vincent, like, his side story, like when you go into the cave and he
yeah,
sees like Lucrezia and he goes through all his history and everything. You can't fly there. Like, you have to land on the main continent and then walk up to the cave. So, like, you're still coming across random encounters, but then you have the no encounter materia that you could just use. So it's like, it's never really been a problem for me, but I could see, actually, it's not a problem for me in Final Fantasy games. It's a problem for me in Pokemon games. Because the
okay,
Pokemon, like, when you're playing like the original Pokemon games, like Pokemon like Red and Blue, for example, like, you don't get running shoes in those games. You get a bike, but you're still like, every 3 feet there's a Pokemon battle, and it's not like, I don't know. Just for Pokemon, like, I hated it in Pokemon. Like I would have to buy a bunch of max repels and just keep using max repels, so I would never get random encounters. Because I think in Pokemon you kind of meet your you kind of plateau a little bit sooner as opposed to like Final Fantasy. Like I don't know, it's weird, but to answer your question, like yeah, the airship is definitely a vital, you know, achievement in every Final Fantasy game. Like, oh yeah, you have the airship now, so you're like the world is opened up to you. But I use it for more of like I hate the airship in which game was it? 8. I hated the airship in 8. Like when you get the Ragnarok, you get it
Yeah.
so late. Like you get it so late. By the time you get it, it's already like, okay, we have the ship now. We can go fight the final boss. It's just like you get it so late, and it's like there's
Yeah.
so much of the content that you can't explore without it. Like you can't go to the islands closest to heaven and hell without the Ragnarok. Like you can't go to certain places without them. So like I hate that, like because it's like behind. Like once you get it, it's so late in the game. Like it essentially just doesn't mean anything at that point. Final Fantasy VII did a really good job of like the vehicle progression. Like you start off with the tiny Bronco, or you get the buggy first, and then you get the tiny
Yeah.
Bronco, and then you get the airships. Like you have like the progression of it. I think they did it the best as far as like graduating up to the airship. And what it sounds like Final Fantasy One did the same thing because you get the canoe, then the boat, then the airship. So it sounds like, yeah, if there's progression in transportation, I'm fine with it. I hate fast travel. Like, I hate fast travel. I think it takes
Yeah.
away from exploration. I really hate it. Um, Final Fantasy 16 had a fast travel system, and I hated it, but it was so necessary because it was like you just want to move on and you just want to progress. So it's just like, I get it because there is no airship in 16. You just have a chocobo. So it's still like, that's your ultimate means of transportation, and 16 is the chocobo. Um, but yeah, I don't like fast travel. I do like the progression of transportation for sure, and I feel like it's a staple in all Final Fantasy games. Like you have your, your air, you get your transportation. That's just it allows, like you said, once you get that accomplishment, it's like okay, now the game really opens up.
So, looking at speaking of the game and how it opens up, let's talk about the cinematic opening of Final Fantasy. Now, what is unique about this innovation is, for us as gamers now, we've grown accustomed to a very cinematic opening. I almost think we take it for granted sometimes, and it has
Hmm.
to really have a very emotional hook. No spoilers here, but Expedition 33 has that kind of hook to it. Um, Spoiler for The Last of Us, which is my favorite video game, but it's been out for like 15 years. If you haven't played it, you're not going to.
Yeah.
You go through the opening prelude, and Sarah dies, and it cuts to your opening title, The Last of Us, and goes into the storyline of the game, right? So Final Fantasy innovated and really perfected this opening, right? So in the 1980s, games usually started with just the title screen and dropped you into the world. And what Final Fantasy did was they had you play for roughly about 20 or 30 minutes. You actually defeat your first boss fight, who is Garland, which, spoilers for a 40-year-old game here, he is also who you fight at the end, right? You cross a
Yeah.
bridge, and then only does then does the screen fade to black, and the music starts to begin, and then it has the opening credit roll for the game. And I wish, like, playing this game. Look, I will tell you, gameplay wise, this was a rough game for me to go through because of how we've evolved as gamers now, and like we're
Sure.
very impatient. I
Sure.
don't fucking know how. I feel like I'm a intelligent 38-year-old man. How the hell a 8-year-old Andrew was supposed to navigate this game and know where to go? I have no idea, because I got about halfway through this game. I was like, okay, I gotta find a strategy guide, because I don't know where I'm supposed to go
Yeah.
and know what I'm supposed to do. Um, but I just wish that I could have been there when this game dropped, played it for the first time, and seeing how this thing played out. And because there are a lot of times where now when I play a game, I will play to that opening credit, and then I'll go ahead and stop. Like, I just need to be able to dip my toes in the water to not ever have that, and to have the kind of the cinematic opening that this game had 40 years later, I'm sitting there still like, when I played through it, I was like, that was really cool. Like, because
Hmm.
you felt like it was different and it was unique, and the impact that it's had on the industry is that it made games feel like a grand movie or like an epic novel rather than just another toy or another video game. It gave players a sense of that the adventure really starts now, and I think that is an incredible feat for them back then that has obviously lived up, to the video games that we have now, and the way that they open. I will give you my two favorite impacts, I guess, that this has had, and then I'll turn it over to you. First one is Final Fantasy VII Remake. I love the first Final Fantasy, the original Final Fantasy VII, but Final Fantasy VII Remake is in my top 10 favorite video games of all time. And in that game, when it opens up and the way it opens up in the graphics, and you see Aerith for the first time, and you see, the uh I guess she's in, in the, she's not in the slum, she's in the top plate of, I'm assuming sector 7 or maybe 8 or whatever, I don't remember where,
Hmm.
but like you kind of
Yeah.
see the train and then Cloud coming in and everything. Just a very, really cool opening. But my favorite Final Fantasy opening of all time, and I don't think you get it without Final Fantasy 1, is from Final Fantasy X. The opening in Xanarkand, you're playing a little bit as Tidus, and then you go to the stadium. In the state, because those are graphics. That was something I got to experience for the first time. That was just unreal to me. The graphics,
Right.
the music. You get, Tidus getting ready to play Blitzball. You have Auron just sitting on the, like, fucking Batman looking over the city. It
Yeah.
was an amazing opening, and I still get chills when I think about that opening to Final Fantasy X. And hats off to Final Fantasy 1 for saying we're going to do something unique and different. So how do you think that's translated into gaming now, and do you have any openings that stand out to you?
Yeah, actually, the one that stands out to me like the most, well, 16 had it. Like Final Fantasy 16's opening was crazy because for anybody who hasn't played 16 yet, like you play as young Clive first, and then it like the game starts, or like you play as older Clive first, he gets knocked out, and then you play the prologue, and then you get awakened back to when he's an adult again. So they kind of did that. Um, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. It's a PS1 game. When you load the game up, I think it's Richter or I think it's Richter that you're playing as. You're playing as the character in the game. He's maxed out, like he has all his powers, and like the first thing that you do in that game is you fight Dracula, who's like the ultimate boss of these games, and he has a two stage boss fight where you fight him regular, and then he transforms into this beast, and then you beat him, and then like something happens, and then Richter, I'm pretty sure it's Richter goes missing. So like nobody knows where he's at. So then they call this other guy, his name is Alucard, who is the guy that you end up playing as for the game, for like the whole game. He goes to the castle where Richter was last seen, and he's all geared up. Like he's max level, everything. Like you go in and you're one-shotting everything. You're just and I'm like, oh, this game is super easy. So you're just murdering everything, and then you get to the point where you see the Grim Reaper, you start talking to the Grim Reaper, and they have this conversation about, oh, whatever, like I'm gonna stop you or whatever. The Grim Reaper strips you of all your powers, so you go back to like zero, and then you're like, now everything that you were killing with one shot is now like you actually have to like, hit them a couple times, and you have to like rebuild your character. So like that stuff like that, like that's kind of like that similar, like you start off a certain way and you're expecting that to be the entire game, and they just completely do a 180, and they're like, nope, you're going to start from zero and build yourself all the way back up. But they give you that like that taste of like, oh, this is like the ultimate power that I'm going to get to by the end of the game. So it makes it like worthwhile getting there. Another one was Kingdom Hearts 2. I don't know if you played Kingdom Hearts 2. Kingdom Hearts 2, you if you played Kingdom Hearts 1, you play the entire game as Sora. You go through the story, whatever. Kingdom Hearts 2 starts off and you're playing as a completely different character. You're playing as Roxas. And you're like, who is this guy? Who is Roxas? Why am I here? Why am I here? and you play like maybe like the first 20 or 30 minutes as Roxas, and then you find out all this stuff about him, and it's because Sora was put to sleep by the end of the first game, so he has to like reawaken. Like the first half hour of Kingdom Hearts 2, you're not even playing as the main character. That one stuck out to me too. But I like when games do that because it shows that they're trying to do something different. They're trying to change the narrative. They're not trying to like copy paste, rinse and repeat. Like they're trying to approach the situation from a different angle, which is going to make it enjoyable for the player. And I appreciate stuff like that. I mean, yeah, I mean, The Last of Us, like the beginning of Last of Us was crazy. Like that was insane. I was just like, whoa. And then you're hooked. So you're like, okay, I
Yeah.
have to. You're just like, yep, this is it. And if you have a good start, like a good 20 to 30-minute prologue, just to get you either into it or like asking questions and like, I need to figure this out now. That's what propels you on that 50-hour journey to complete the game.
Yeah, no, I'm full in agreement there. And then lastly, the fifth thing that I had listed here that I thought that the game was very innovative in, and I think that this is the most important thing that Final Fantasy contributed to the landscape of gaming now, is it gave us a more mature storytelling. So one of the things that video games were notorious about, especially early on, even when I was a kid, a little bit post Final Fantasy until the rest of the gaming industry caught up, was your storyline is very simple. You save the princess, you kill the Demon King, you go through 20 30 hours of gameplay, and at the end of it it's like, congratulations, you won, and then you move on to the next game. What Final Fantasy did was it started with the rescue of the princess, and then quickly just spiraled into this complex story of time travel and boss fights and things like that. And the ultimate villain who you beat at the beginning, like I said, Garland, is who you end up fighting as your final boss fight at the end. Except now you've traveled 2,000 years into the past in order to fight him. These were things that the video game industry was not accustomed to at the time. That Final
Right.
Fantasy said, you know what, we're just going to go, balls to the wall. Let's figure this out. Let's do what we want to do here. And the impact is that it has given us video games with such a high concept of science fiction and fantasy and deep narrative and storytelling, emotional narratives and storytelling, that what Final Fantasy ultimately did, in my opinion, was said, hey, we're going to make a game that is for everybody. Like, it can be enjoyed by kids, it can be enjoyed by adults. And what it ultimately ended up with were nerds like you and me growing up into our 30s, still loving complex and emotional storytelling, because Final
Hell yeah.
Fantasy, they gave it to us first. They didn't treat us like we were just dumb kids. Here's Princess Pete's in a fucking tower. Go save her. And how that had an ultimate impact on other media. You and I talked about this in a previous episode of the Batman Drew podcast. Toy Story, Pixar does the same thing. Pixar makes movies that are kid friendly, but with adult narratives, right? You
Mm-hmm.
Inside Out, that's a fucking
Mm-hmm.
emotional movie,
Hell yeah.
made for kids, but with a storyline that can be enjoyed by all. Eh, Those are things because Final Fantasy dove in and said, you know what, we're going to do something different here. And I don't think you get stories like The Last of Us, Expedition 33, complex storylines, like, even in the world of Final Fantasy 8 is a fucking roller coaster of a storyline.
Yeah. It's
But
super
you
complex.
you don't get that kind of complexity without the first Final Fantasy. So what do you think that I'm overstating it, or do you think that Final Fantasy really set the bar for narrative storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've played a good amount of games in my life. I feel like I've tried a lot of different genres, and I still come back to like the single player narrative. Like that's still my favorite type of game. Like the gameplay is second to a very good story, whether it's an RPG, whether it's an action based game, like even like a storytelling game where like a telltale game, like those types of games.
Yeah.
As long as the story is good, like I'm there for it. And the thing that I respect about Final Fantasy as the anthology series that it is it respects your time as a player, but it also respects and knows the demographic it's going for, right? Like, yes, you have to cater to the masses because you need to sell your game, right? Like it's unfortunately it does come down to dollars and cents, right? but you've built a dedicated fan base over the 30-year history of your games. So you know what your floor is going to be. You know that at worst, all the people that have played your games for the last 30 years are going to continue to play these games. They don't have to, just like EA does with Madden and Call of Duty, like those types of games. They don't have to put a lot of effort into making these games because the loyal fan base is still going to buy these games year in and year out. You know, Madden is the same game every year. 2K is the same game every year. Call of Duty is the same game every year. But they sell millions and millions of copies because there are a group of people that enjoy those games. So, you know, they can continue, they can make the same Final Fantasy game every single year and people will still buy it, but they don't do that, right? Like, fundamentally, each Final Fantasy game is very different from its predecessor. Like, there are similarities because there is a core recipe of what a Final Fantasy game has to follow, like the crystal. Like, there's certain tropes that all Final Fantasy games have to include, but there is not one Final Fantasy game that is the same as the previous one. I guess you can, like, spin-off ones, like 13 had two
Yeah.
spin-off games after the main line. I guess those are the same. But even like Final Fantasy 10 and 10 2, like they're totally different games, right? So a lot of the Final Fantasy games, they're not the same. So individually they can cater to specific audiences, but the overall like broad stroke of it is still catering to its fan base, right? And it's a fan base that has existed for over 30 years. And they know that. So they're purposely making different stories, fleshing out the characters, adding bits and pieces to innovate and change things to make it fresh but still familiar to like somebody who maybe hasn't played Final Fantasy. Like, I haven't played Final Fantasy 12 ever, but I bet I could go pick it up and be like, okay, I just have to learn how this gambit system works, but everything else is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that they do that because that's what has garnered its success over time, and it also reflects on like the newer stuff, like Claire Obscure Expedition 33. Like, that development team, they're all huge Final Fantasy fans, and like you said, we don't get a Claire Obscure if Square Enix, Soft, Square, whatever, didn't put the love and care into the games that they developed to influence the next generation. And that's what it's the passing of the torch moment. I don't think Square Enix is going anywhere, right? Like, I think you're going to get a Final Fantasy 20 and third. Like, I still think that's going to continue. But these newer studios like Sandfall Interactive with Claire Obscure and you know, other studios that have made other RPGs. You know, like Persona is a big RPG, right? Like the Shin Megami Tensei stuff is huge, and there's a lot of other RPGs outside of Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
Um, but it had to start somewhere, right? So yeah, I mean, it'll forever be my favorite game franchise just because of how many of them I've played, how many memories I've had playing, how much hours I've dove into them, and how many of the characters that like I've really fallen in love with. Like, they're not always home runs, but there are some characters who are very well written. And you know, I'm a sucker for a protagonist who has some emotional baggage and is trying to figure shit out, and it goes on an emotional journey, and his character arc gets completed, his or her character arc gets completed by the end. I'm a sucker for that because you feel like you grow with the character as you're playing their story. So, I mean, yeah, I'm excited to see what the future holds for them because I feel like with Expedition 33, they have been challenged. And I feel like that doesn't happen very often. Like, a lot of games don't really challenge Final Fantasy because they're such a huge thing, right? But now they've been challenged. Like, Claire Obscure came out of nowhere and just set the world on fire. Like, it was a phenomenon. And now it's like you have people paying attention to it. Like, if they can do that with the limited resources that they had, what can we do with the unlimited amount of resources that we have? And I'm excited to see the influence that now Claire Obscure is going to have on the gaming industry as far as RPGs is concerned.
Very, very well said. So let's dive into the ripple effect, right? The legacy that Final Fantasy One left, and I have four that I'm calling out, and I'm going to run through the four that I have. I'm going to speak to the one that I think is the most impactful, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. And if there's one that speaks to you, feel free to harp on it. If there's something extra that you think that could be added, please do so. The success of Final Fantasy One, it did more than just save Square. It established a blueprint for modern RPGs that shifted the entire industry forward, especially with cinematic storytelling and high production value. So, first things first, it created a very cinematic RPG standard. So, before Final Fantasy, games were mostly about the mechanics, and the story was this an excuse to be able to play the game. But Final Fantasy changed the goal from an RPG from let's reach the end of the dungeon to let's experience an epic journey. And I think that's super important. And what it did for the industry was this led to a storytelling arms race in the 90s. And developers realized that they could start using games to tell complex stories about environmentalism, Final Fantasy VII, right? Death or politics and even religion. Final Fantasy X, which is maybe the most notable story for my personal
Mm-hmm.
experience,
Mm-hmm.
and it had a modern echo with Final Fantasy I's prelude and cinematic ambitions that we wouldn't likely have some of the modern narrative heavy titles that we have, like The Witcher 3 or Baldur's Gate 3, without Final Fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, it really became a bridge between the East and West, and it allowed for Western RPGs and Eastern, JRPGs to really give us a streamlined product for home consoles. And this made RPG games accessible to millions of people who honestly didn't know about JRPGs and the way that those storylines were able to play. And even after Final Fantasy One, if you don't know the history there, Final Fantasy Two in the US was actually Final Fantasy Four in reality. It just took a while for us in America to kind of catch up into how important
Mm-hmm.
these stories were and the legacy that it left behind. It created the JRPG identity. And now, yeah, you have your Western RPG games and you have but for the most part, those games are accessible to us both, no matter what side we're at. It created constant innovation as a brand. And it established a rare industry precedent and a massive franchise where every entry is a fresh start. Like we had talked about, you can jump into any Final Fantasy game, and aside from the sequels that were in that specific franchise, but you can jump into Final Fantasy VI and enjoy a very unique storyline versus Final Fantasy 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. And if you
Mm-hmm.
haven't experienced Final Fantasy 10 too, it is peak Final Fantasy. Just throwing that out there for anybody wanting to be able to experience what great Final Fantasy can be. And then lastly for me, it gave us professional game music, right? Like so
Yeah.
the backstory between the artwork in the game and the music of the game is very interesting. We're not going to dig too much into it, but basically when Final Fantasy came out, they went out and got our composer. Um, man, I am
No,
not even going to try.
Nobuo
Yeah,
Uematsu.
Nobu, yeah. No,
Uematsu.
we're just gonna call him the goat because that's what he is. He's the fucking goat
The goat.
of video game music. And they said, listen, we want music that is in depth and emotionally striking, right? We want music to be able to be the tent pole of our games. And even playing Final Fantasy One, I was like, shit, like the music in this is really, really good. And what that led to, honestly, is for music to have such an impactful um experience for us in our modern gaming. I know for you, Expedition 33, the music is phenomenal, and it's the heartbeat of
Yeah.
that game. You don't
Yeah.
get that without the composition that you get with these Final Fantasy games. I know you're a huge music lover, and this is my for me, the music of Final Fantasy is the biggest ripple effect of them all. And I know you're gonna love this part of me sharing the story. So I was heading to Walmart to go pick up a grocery order a couple of days ago, and Grayson was with me, and he wanted to listen to the music from the Minecraft movie. I was like, all right, whatever, man. So I turned on the Minecraft soundtrack, and we are listening to it. And there's a couple of songs I know, like Lava Chicken and stuff like that. I'm kind of
Yeah,
singing with
yeah.
them. And there was a song I've never seen Minecraft. He's seen it 9,000 times. And there's a song that comes on where I guess Jack Black's character Steve is singing a song to his dog Dennis, and it's kind of a soft song, almost like a sad tone to it. I don't know if you've seen Minecraft or not, but
Nah, I haven't yet.
I'm listening to the song, and Grayson's behind me. He's kind of singing to it, and when the song was over, he goes, "Dad, that song makes me sad." And I was like, "Why does it make you sad?" And he goes in to tell me that it's a part of the movie where Steve has to say goodbye to his dog, and it reminds him of that part of the movie and the
Hmm.
experience that Steve had. And I told him, I said, man, I said, that's what music does. I said, it can
Hmm.
be happy, but it can be sad. But either way, it can bring back memories that you never thought you had. And
Hmm.
I told him, I said, you know how dad always listens to, because it for him, it's music with no words. I said, you know how dad always listens to music with no words? And he was like, yeah. I said, because
Yeah,
I got to play some of the games that had that
yeah.
music, and it takes me back to those times. And so it was cool to be able to see him like at 5 years old be like, holy shit, like music, plays a huge impact. And for me, I can listen to Xanarkin and feel like I'm right back into that world of
Hmm.
Spirit. I can listen to Eris theme and feel like I'm right back on the streets of Midgar. I can listen to hell, I the opening to Final Fantasy VIII. I don't remember the name of the song, but as soon as I hear it, I feel like I'm
Oh yeah, I
standing
know
on
what you're
that
talking
beach
about.
watching
Yeah,
the
yeah,
waves
yeah.
crash in and stuff. And it was just, it wasn't just background noise anymore. It was
Hmm.
a pivotal part of the video game franchise and video games moving forward, and it set the tone. And I just, now you have full wide, world class orchestra concerts
Yeah.
centered around music of not only video games but of Final Fantasy. Me
Yep.
and Scarlett went to a Final Fantasy VII concert in Colorado a couple of years ago because I love the music. And I think
Hmm.
that when you're looking at the impact that Final Fantasy had, um, man, it pulls at your heartstrings because of the music. And I think that that's
Hmm.
a huge pivotal part. So there's my four ripple effects. Dad, man, I'm tossing it over to you. Does any of those speak to you, or is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, I mean it's the music for me 100%. I mean, the way I look at it is we have three major forms of media in today's day and age, right? We have movies, we have music, and we have video games. Those are the three major, I guess books too, but yeah, whatever. Okay, books. So books, video games, movies, and music, right? So when I look at Final Fantasy, obviously they've had the success of being this video game juggernaut, right? Um, they have transcended that into the music now. Like you said, there's actual orchestras that go on tour playing Final Fantasy music to sell out crowds in arenas, amphitheaters. Like I even think there was one done in Sydney, Australia, a few years ago. Like that's a world known musical venue. Like it has transcended its its foothold. Like it Final Fantasy is known for being a successful video game franchise, but it has become bigger than that because it now has the success with the music. It hasn't had a lot of success in the movies, and I don't think it probably ever will because it probably doesn't need to. Because the way the games are made now, they're like huge movies, basically. That Final Fantasy movie, Spirits Within, was not great. I mean, that was a really terrible movie back in the early 2000s, and I wanted it to be good because I was like, holy shit, this is a Final Fantasy movie, like an
Yeah,
actual motion picture, right? Like, and it sucked. But Advent Children was great. Um, even though it didn't have a theatrical release, it was a great extension of that Final Fantasy VII story. And I don't know if you're a big fan of Final Fantasy 15, but Final Fantasy 15 had a prequel movie called Kingsglaive, which was incredible. Like that movie was incredible. And I'm glad that I not only got to watch that, but I got to watch the Brotherhood anime before playing the game, because it spells out so much of the history of Lucius and the bloodline of Noctis and his friendships with Gladiolus and Ignis and Prompto. Like, it just builds on the history of that. So it helped me to enjoy Final Fantasy 15 a lot more. And a lot of people don't really like that game because of its
Yeah.
departure from, it was the first game to depart from that turn-based style combat into the full-on action style combat. And they didn't really nail the combat in that game. They nailed it with Remake and Rebirth, but they didn't nail it for 15 because they were still working on it. But the story was incredible. The character developments were incredible. The open world was lacking and stuff like that. But I digress, right? The music to me has transcended another form of media. So now you have this video game juggernaut that's also making waves in the music world. And to me, that's always going to be something that has to be talked about. Like, how successful is Final Fantasy? Well, it's not only one of the most successful video game franchises, it's one of the most successful pieces of music and composition you're ever going to see in the world. Like, it's like the idea of a video game soundtrack going on tour and being played by orchestras is insane to me.
Yeah.
So for me, it's the music transcends the world of video gaming. It has broken that fourth wall, and it's infiltrated another form of media, and not just lightly. It has become such a successful vehicle into the world of music that, to me, that's like two out of the four. Like, that's crazy. Like, that's, I don't think enough people like focus on how impactful the music of Final Fantasy has been to not only us, but just the world in general.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and it what was really cool about the documentary series, and how I started with Final Fantasy was to hear all the stories of how impactful the music was, for a lot of the fans of Final Fantasy, and honestly how it got a lot of them through some really difficult times in their lives that they otherwise don't think they would have gone through or gotten through. Um, Music is definitely super impactful. So before I close this out, Adrian, is there anything else you want to add or say about how Final Fantasy paved the way for those who came after?
Yeah, I mean, it's the rich history, it's the attention to detail, it's the for me, like the subtleties of it. Like, even though it's an anthology series, and each game is separate from the other, there's still those little breadcrumbs and those little, like, yes, like Final Fantasy 7 is a different game from Final Fantasy 8, but there's still those little, like, the creatures, right? A lot of the creatures that you fight in all Final Fantasy games, a lot of them are the same. Like, you have your staples, you have your Marlboros, you have your behemoths, you have your curls, like, you have your dragons, you have your, and then the summons too. Like, you have your Bahamutes, you have your Shivas, you have your Ifrits, like, you have your connection in a series that is not connected. And I appreciate the attention and to detail and the subtleties, because they're proud of their creations, right? Like, they are proud from where they started to where they are now. They are proud of the impact that they've had on their industry. And yes, I mean, of course, I feel like, as well oiled of a machine as Square Enix and Final Fantasy has become, I still think they still focus on what's important to us as gamers. They still focus on giving us a grade A story. Some of them hit, some games hit harder than others, but overall, I think the stories are still grade A. Like, you could see the passion, you could see the effort that's put into the stories of these games. And um without the cultural success that it has had, we wouldn't have games like Clair Obscur. We wouldn't have games like another good one I hear of is Metaphor V Fantasio. Like, there's a bunch of other games that you wouldn't have if it wasn't for
Yeah.
Sakaguchi and Final Fantasy. So
No, I totally agree, and that's very well said. I get to cheat. I wrote mine out here in advance for you guys, but to close this episode out of for those who come after a podcast, our first series. Listen, in the end, the story of Final Fantasy is a reminder that the most enduring legacies are often born from the brink of failure. It was a game that built by people who thought they were saying goodbye, and instead, they ended up introducing themselves to the world. They took a genre that was once cold, mathematical, and confined to the flickering screens of expensive computers and gave it a heart, a cinematic eye, and a sweeping score. They proved that a video game could be more than just a distraction. It could be a digital odyssey, an emotional journey, and a cultural bridge between the East and the West. And because Sakaguchi and his team dared to pour their final effort into the world of crystals and airships, they didn't just save a company. They changed the vocabulary of play forever. Every time you customize a character, you fly across an open world, or you feel a surge of emotion as the orchestral theme swells. You're walking through the doors they kicked open in 1987. The final in the title didn't mark the ending. It was simply the prelude to a story that the world is still telling now, 35 years later. So, if you haven't experienced Final Fantasy 1, I encourage you to go out, pick up the Pixel Remastered, give it a shot, play it. The gameplay sucks, but it is a great experience to have. And it'll honestly, you'll play through it and you'll start realizing just how impactful this game was on the modern gaming industry. So, thank you to everyone who's made it this far. Drop your comments and everything in below, and let us know what your thoughts were of Final Fantasy. Dad, man, thank you again for being a part of this journey with me. This is one of hopefully many more to come. This will be a bi-weekly podcast that will drop on YouTube and anywhere podcasts can be found, Spotify, iHeart, all that kind of good stuff. And yeah, let's celebrate what came before and looking at how impactful it was for those who come after. Thank you guys. We'll catch you guys again at the same Batman Drew time on the same Batman Drew channel. Bye, guys.